Current estimates suggest over 2 billion casualties, replied his aide, her voice shaking. The numbers are still coming in. 2 billion. The number was too large to comprehend. It represented more people than had lived on Earth for most of human history. And they had died in less than 3 days. Kane closed his eyes. He thought of his daughter, who lived on Kepler 7 with her husband and their young son. He thought of the messages she used to send him, full of pictures and stories and the simple joys of life on a new world. He would never receive another message from her again. When he opened his eyes, something had changed in them. The grief was still there, but it had been joined by something else. Something cold and hard and patient. What are our options? He asked. We have 43 ships in the Sol system, his aide replied. The blockade fleet numbers over 200. We cannot break through. Then we don't try to break through. Not today. Kane turned to address the Parliament. We survive. We rebuild. And when the time is right, we make them pay for every life they took. At Nexus Prime, Ambassador Elena Vasquez was brought before the High Council for judgment. The trial lasted less than an hour. The evidence against humanity was presented. Elena was not allowed to speak in her defense. The verdict was decided before the proceedings began. She was found guilty of conspiracy to commit genocide. The sentence was death. They executed her in the Great Hall in front of representatives from all 42 species. Sylveth watched with satisfaction as the life left her eyes. One more human removed from the galaxy. Billions more to contain. When it was over, he addressed the council. The human threat has been neutralized, he announced. Their colonies are destroyed. Their fleet is broken. Their homeworld is blockaded. They will trouble us no more. The council accepted his words without question. The crisis was over. The galaxy was safe. They could return to their normal business and forget about the unfortunate species that had risen so quickly and fallen even faster. None of them noticed the Melody representative leaving the chamber. None of them saw the message he sent to a hidden receiver on Earth. None of them suspected that their crimes had been witnessed and recorded. And none of them imagined that Earth was not broken. Not truly. They had wounded humanity. They had killed billions of innocent people. They had destroyed everything humans had built among the stars. But they had not destroyed humanity's will to survive. And they had not destroyed humanity's capacity for vengeance. On Earth, the blockade settled into place. 200 warships and dozens of automated defense stations surrounded the Sol system, cutting humanity off from the rest of the galaxy. The message was clear. Stay here and live, or try to leave and die. The survivors gathered in the ruins of their world. The Parliament building had been damaged in the initial chaos. Its great dome cracked and its walls scarred. Commander Kane stood before the broken structure and looked at the faces of the people who had come to hear him speak. They were afraid. They were grieving. They had lost family, friends, entire worlds. They had been betrayed by a galaxy they had trusted, attacked by allies they had believed in, abandoned by a system they had joined in good faith. Kane understood their pain. He felt it himself, a burning wound in his chest that would never fully heal. But he also understood something else, something that the Concord had failed to consider. Humanity had faced extinction before. Ice ages, plagues, wars that threatened to end civilization. Every time, they had survived. Every time, they had come back stronger. It was not a choice. It was simply what humans did. They think they have beaten us, Kane said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. They think we are finished. They believe they can murder our children, burn our worlds, and we will simply accept it. He paused, letting the words settle. They are wrong. He looked up at the stars, visible even through the haze of smoke that still hung over parts of the city. Somewhere out there, the species that had killed his daughter were celebrating their victory. Somewhere out there, Archon Sylveth was planning his next move, confident that humanity was no longer a threat. "We will not attack today," King continued. "We will not attack tomorrow. We will be patient. We will be quiet. We will let them forget about us." His voice hardened. "And then, when they least expect it, we will remind them what humanity is capable of." The crowd stirred. Some of them were crying. Others were nodding slowly, the fire of determination kindling in their eyes. "They wanted us broken," Kane said. "They wanted us silent. They will learn what happens when humanity has nothing left to lose." He stepped down from the platform and walked away. Behind him, the crowd began to disperse, returning to their homes and their families and the grim work of survival. But something had changed. A seed had been planted. A promise had been made. 20 years later, that promise would be kept. In the darkness of space, the blockade ships maintained their positions, their sensors watching for any sign of human activity. They saw nothing unusual. A broken planet. A defeated species. A problem that had been solved. They did not see the construction beginning beneath Earth's oceans. They did not detect the shipyards being carved into mountains and hidden in underground caverns. They did not know about the research facilities where human scientists were already analyzing captured alien technology, learning its secrets, planning improvements. The Concorde had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that destroying humanity's colonies would destroy humanity's spirit. They had believed that overwhelming force would create lasting submission. They had thought that fear would keep humans contained. But humanity was not like the other species of the galaxy. Humans were the children of a harsh world, forged by millions of years of struggle and survival. They did not surrender when they were beaten. They did not accept when they were told their place. They did not forgive when they were wronged. And they never, ever forgot. The stars continued to shine over Earth, indifferent to the suffering below. But if those stars had eyes, they might have noticed something changing in the night sky. A new resolve, a new purpose, a new darkness gathering in the hearts of those who had survived. The Concorde had won the battle, but the war was just beginning. The Great Hall of the Galactic Concorde stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds formed beneath it, drifting lazily past floating platforms where diplomats from 42 species conducted the business of governing a galaxy. Light poured in through crystal windows that showed the endless stars beyond, a reminder of what they all shared and what they all sought to protect. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the human delegation's platform, her hands steady on the railing as she looked out at the assembled representatives. She was 53 years old, with gray streaking her black hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of decades spent in service to her people. She had fought for this moment her entire career. Humanity's acceptance into the Galactic Concorde had been her life's work. 3 years ago, when human ships had first made contact with the Melody trading vessel near Jupiter, the galaxy had changed forever. Humanity learned they were not alone. More than that, they learned they were late to a party that had been going on for millions of years. The Concorde had existed for longer than humans had walked upright. Its members had built empires, fought wars, and eventually learned to live together in something resembling peace. Now humanity was part of that peace. The newest members, the youngest species, the ones everyone watched with curiosity and, in some cases, concern. Elena smiled as she thought about how far they had come. Earth's 12 colony worlds were thriving. Human ships traveled freely through Concorde space. Human scientists worked alongside alien researchers on projects that would have seemed like magic just a generation ago. It was everything humanity had ever dreamed of. She did not know that it was all about to end, across the great hall. On a platform carved from black stone that seemed to drink in the light, Archon Sylveth of the Velthari Dominion watched the human ambassador with eyes that held no warmth. The Velthari were ancient. They had ruled half the galaxy when most of the current Concord species were still living in caves. They had been forced to share power, forced to accept equals, forced to watch younger species rise to challenge their supremacy. And now these humans, these creatures who had only discovered fire 100,000 years ago, they were advancing too quickly, learning too fast. In 3 short years, human engineers had improved upon Concord technology in ways that made Velthari scientists nervous. Human diplomats had formed alliances that shifted the balance of power in the Council. Human merchants had carved out trading networks that competed with Velthari interests. Sylveth had lived for over 800 years. He had seen threats rise and fall. He knew how to recognize a danger before it became unstoppable. The humans were a danger, and Sylveth had decided they needed to be stopped. The council session that day was routine. Trade agreements, border disputes, the usual business of keeping a galaxy running. Elena spoke briefly about humanity's request to colonize the Kepler cluster, a collection of barren worlds that no other species wanted. It was a reasonable request. The cluster was far from any major trade routes and held no strategic value. The council approved the request with little discussion. Elena thanked them graciously and returned to her seat, not noticing the slight smile on Sylveth's face. That night, as Elena slept in her quarters on the diplomatic station orbiting Nexus Prime, Sylveth called a secret meeting. Only 9 of the 12 council members attended. The other 3, including representatives from the Melodai and 2 smaller species, had not been invited. Sylveth did not need them. He only needed a majority. The chamber where they met was hidden deep within the station, shielded from every form of surveillance. The 9 representatives took their seats and waited for Sylveth to speak. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "The humans are building a weapon," he said. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "A planet killer. They have been constructing it in secret on one of their colony worlds." The representative stirred. A planet-killing weapon was the ultimate crime under Concord law. No species was permitted to develop such technology. The punishment was severe. "You have proof?" asked the Crucix representative, a being of living crystal who caught the light as he moved. Sylveth touched a control on his platform. Holographic images appeared in the center of the chamber. Technical readouts, sensor data, communications intercepts. All of it pointed to a massive weapons project hidden on the human colony of Kepler-7. The proof was complete. It was detailed. It was utterly convincing. It was also completely false. Sylveth had spent 2 years creating this fiction. His agents had fabricated every piece of evidence, planted every false trail, manufactured every lie. The humans were guilty of nothing except being human. But the council would never know that. "This cannot be allowed," said the Yanari representative, her 4 eyes blinking in distress. "If the humans are building such a weapon, they must be stopped." "Stopped how?" asked another representative. "They are members of the Concord. They have rights." Sylveth leaned forward. "They forfeit those rights the moment they began building this weapon. The law is clear. We must act to protect the galaxy." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I propose a preemptive containment action. We quarantine their worlds. We confiscate their fleet. We ensure they can never threaten us." The debate lasted for hours. Some representatives were hesitant. The humans had been good members of the Concord. They had followed the rules. They had caused no trouble. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Sylveth was persuasive. In the end, The vote was 9-3 in favor of action. The three who voted against had not been present for the secret meeting. They learned of the decision only after it was made. The operation began 3 days later. Elena Vasquez was asleep when the first alarm sounded. She woke to the sound of explosions and the red flash of emergency lights. Her door burst open and 2 Valkyrie soldiers entered, their weapons pointed at her chest. "Ambassador Vasquez," one of them said, "you are under arrest for crimes against the Concord." She did not resist. There was no point. But as they dragged her from her quarters, she managed to activate a hidden transmitter sewn into her sleeve. It sent a single word to Earth: betrayal. The message arrived too late. Across human space, the attack came without warning. The Concord had mobilized a joint fleet of over 1,000 warships, drawn from 9 different species. They struck all 12 human colonies simultaneously, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect coordination on Kepler 7, where the fictional weapon was supposedly being built. The bombardment began within seconds of arrival. Orbital defense platforms were destroyed before they could fire a single shot. Warships descended through the atmosphere, their weapons raining fire on cities that had no chance of defending themselves. The colony had 2 million people. Most of them were civilians, farmers, teachers, children. They died in their beds, in their homes, in the streets as they tried to flee. The Concord ship showed no mercy. Their orders were clear: contain the human threat by any means necessary. On New Shanghai, the second largest human colony, the attack came at midday. People were going about their daily lives when the sky filled with alien warships. The colonial militia tried to fight back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The battle lasted less than an hour. When it was over, the city centers were craters, and the survivors were fleeing into the wilderness. The human fleet, such as it was, scrambled to respond. Earth had perhaps 200 warships spread across 12 star systems. They were new ships, built with Concord technology, crewed by people who had never expected to fight a real war. They faced a force 5 times their size, commanded by admirals with centuries of experience. The battles were not battles. They were massacres at the colony of Horizon. Captain James Wright led a desperate defense with 6 frigates against 80 enemy warships. He managed to destroy 3 of them before his ship was torn apart. His last transmission was picked up by a civilian freighter hiding in an asteroid field. "Tell Earth we did not surrender. Tell them we fought." The freighter escaped into faster-than-light travel. It was one of the only human ships to survive the first night. On Earth itself, the news arrived in fragments. Distress calls, broken transmissions, reports of destruction so vast that they seemed impossible to believe. The United Earth Parliament convened an emergency session, but there was nothing they could do. The nearest colony was 4 days away at maximum speed. By the time any help could arrive, it would all be over. Supreme Commander Marcus Kane stood in the Parliament chamber and listened to the reports. He was 60 years old, a veteran of the resource wars that had nearly destroyed Earth a century earlier. He had seen death. He had seen destruction. But he had never seen anything like this. "How many?" he asked quietly. "We are not soldiers," he continued. "We are instruments of consequence. The galaxy decided that human lives have no value. They killed our families. They burned our worlds. They thought we would accept it." He stopped and stared at the recruits with eyes that held no mercy. "We are going to teach them how wrong they were." The recruits did not cheer. They did not shout or pump their fists. They simply nodded, their faces hard, their eyes cold. They understood. They had grown up understanding. Revenge was not a passion for them. It was a duty. Intelligence operations began in the 10th year. The blockade, made it impossible to send ships out of the Sol system. But it was not impossible to send people. Human agents were modified genetically, their features altered, their biology adjusted to mimic other species closely enough to pass casual inspection. It was dangerous work. If they were discovered, they would be executed immediately. 17 agents were sent out in the first wave. Only 9 survived their missions. But those 9 brought back information that was worth more than any number of lives. They mapped Concord defenses. They identified the locations of major military installations. They recorded patrol routes and response times and emergency protocols. They found the weak points in the galaxy's armor, the gaps that humanity would exploit when the time came. They also found something unexpected. The Melody representative who had witnessed Elena Vasquez's execution had not forgotten what he had seen. He had been gathering evidence of Silvest's conspiracy for years, documenting the lies that had led to the betrayal. He found the human agent who approached him and gave them everything he had. The agent brought the evidence back to Earth. Kane reviewed it personally, reading through thousands of pages of communications, recordings, and documents. The proof was undeniable. The attack on humanity had been based entirely on lies. There had been no weapon. There had been no threat. Just an ancient species that feared competition and decided to eliminate it before it became too powerful. Kane did not release the evidence. Not yet. The galaxy was not ready to hear the truth. But when the time came, when humanity emerged from the shadows and began its campaign of retribution, the truth would be part of the attack. Every species in the Concord would learn what had really happened. They would know that their government had committed genocide based on lies. And they would know that humanity had come for justice. The years passed slowly. Each day brought new challenges, new problems to solve, new obstacles to overcome. But humanity never wavered. They could not afford to waver. The memory of the dead would not allow it. Kane grew older. His health deteriorated. Doctors told him he would not live to see the end of the project. He ignored them and kept working, pushing himself beyond the limits of what his body could sustain. He would see this through. He had promised his daughter's memory. He had promised the 2 billion souls who had died. He would not break that promise. In the 20th year, the Retribution fleet was complete. 3,000 warships waited in hidden docks across the planet. Each one was named after a person, a place, or an event from the betrayal. The Kepler 7 Memorial, the new Shanghai Avenger, the Vasquez's Vengeance, which would serve as Kane's flagship. Every name was a reminder of why they were fighting. Every name was a promise that would be kept. Kane stood in the command center of the Vasquez's Vengeance and watched as the final systems came online. The ship hummed with power, its engines ready, its weapons armed, its crew standing by for orders that had been 20 years in the making. His aide approached with a data pad. "Sir, all ships report ready. The fleet is awaiting your command." Kane nodded. He thought about Elena Vasquez, who had died believing that she had failed her people. He thought about his daughter, who had never had the chance to say goodbye. He thought about the 2 billion innocent lives that had been snuffed out because an ancient species had decided that humanity was too dangerous to live. They had been partly right. Humanity was dangerous, more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And now that danger was about to be unleashed. "Signal all ships," Kane said, his voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Prepare for departure. Operation Reckoning begins in 1 hour." Across the planet, 3,000 ships began their power-up sequences. Crews took their stations. Weapons were armed. Navigation systems plotted courses to targets that had been selected years in advance. In the darkness of space, the blockade ships continued their patrols, oblivious to what was about to happen. Their sensors showed nothing unusual. Earth was quiet. Earth was contained. Earth was no longer a threat. They would learn how wrong they were within the hour. Kane took one last look at the blue planet that humanity called home. It was still beautiful, despite everything that had happened. The ocean still sparkled. The clouds still drifted. Life still thrived on its surface, stubborn and resilient, refusing to surrender. Humanity was like its homeworld. They had been wounded. They had been pushed to the edge of extinction. But they had not broken. They had not surrendered. They had waited and prepared and grown strong in the darkness. Now it was time to step into the light. All ships, Kane said, his voice carrying across 3,000 bridges, heard by hundreds of thousands of men and women who had dedicated their lives to this moment. It's time. The full drives activated in perfect synchronization. The Retribution fleet vanished from Earth's orbit, leaving behind nothing but empty space and the fading echoes of their passage. The galaxy was about to learn that Earth remembered, and Earth would never forgive. The galaxy forgot about Earth. It happened slowly, the way most forgetting happens. At first, the news feeds were full of stories about the human containment. Experts discussed the wisdom of the Council's decision. Politicians debated whether the response had been proportionate. For a few months, humanity was the most talked about topic in Concord space. Then other stories came along. A trade dispute between the Crucix and the Yenari. A new scientific discovery in a distant star system. The usual business of running a galaxy with 42 species and countless competing interests. Earth became old news. The blockade became routine. The automated stations circled the solar system, their sensors watching for activity that never came. Patrol ships made their rounds once a month, confirming that the broken planet was still broken, that the defeated species was still defeated. What they could not see was happening underground. Commander Marcus Kane stood in a cavern 3 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains. The space was vast, carved from solid rock by machines that had been working day and night for 5 years. Banks of lights hung from the ceiling, illuminating a scene that would have seemed impossible to anyone who did not know what humanity was capable of. A day, warship was taking shape on the construction floor. It was not like the ships humanity had built before joining the Concorde. Those had been designed for exploration and trade, with weapons added almost as an afterthought. This ship was different. This ship was built for one purpose only: war. How long until it's ready? Kane asked. He was 70 now, his hair completely white, his body beginning to fail him in ways that his will refused to accept. But his eyes were as sharp as ever, and his mind had lost none of its edge. 6 months, replied Chief Engineer Maya Chun. She was young, barely 30, but she had proven herself the most brilliant engineer of her generation. She had been 12 years old when the betrayal happened. Her parents had died on Kepler 7. We're ahead of schedule. Kane nodded. He had heard those words many times over the past 15 years. Every project was ahead of schedule. Every goal was met or exceeded. Humanity was working with a focus and dedication that bordered on the impossible. That was what happened when you gave a species nothing to live for except revenge. The ship before them was the 47th to be constructed in this facility alone. There were other facilities scattered across Earth, hidden in the deepest ocean trenches, buried in the most remote mountains, concealed in places the blockade sensors would never think to look. Together, they had produced something the galaxy had never seen. 3,000 warships. Each one larger and more powerful than anything humanity had possessed before the betrayal. Each one equipped with weapons that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Each one crewed by men and women who had spent their entire lives training for the day they would take the fight to those who had wronged them. Kane walked the length of the construction floor, watching workers weld hull plates and install weapon systems. They moved with quiet efficiency, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. No one spoke more than necessary. No one wasted time on idle conversation. They all knew what was at stake. Project Prometheus, they called it. The name had been Cain's idea. In the old myths, Prometheus had been the titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. He had been punished for his gift, chained to a rock where an eagle ate his liver every day for eternity. The gods had thought they had won. They had thought Prometheus was defeated. But the fire he had given humanity could never be taken back. Now humanity would return the favor. They would bring fire to the gods who had tried to destroy them. And this time, the gods would be the ones who burned. The research facilities were located even deeper underground, in bunkers that had been designed to survive nuclear war. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo led the teams that worked there. Brilliant minds from every scientific discipline working together on projects that would have seemed like science fiction a generation earlier. The most important project was the Fold Drive. The Concorde used faster than light travel based on technology that was millions of years old. It worked by creating a tunnel through space, allowing ships to travel vast distances in relatively short times. But it had limitations. It was slow to charge. It left distinctive energy signatures that could be tracked. It required enormous amounts of power. Human scientists had studied the alien technology carefully. They had taken it apart, learned its secrets, and then asked a simple question: how can we make it better? The answer had taken 10 years to develop. The Fold Drive was faster than any Concorde FTL system. It charged in minutes instead of hours. It left almost no energy signature, making ships that used it nearly invisible to standard sensors. And it was more accurate, allowing ships to emerge from faster-than-light travel exactly where they wanted to be, not just in the general area. When the time came, humanity's fleet would appear out of nowhere. They would strike before the enemy even knew they were there. And they would vanish before any response could be organized. Dr. Okonkwo showed Cain the latest test results. A probe equipped with the Fold Drive had traveled to the edge of the Sol system and back in less than an hour. A journey that would have taken Concorde ships most of a day. The drive worked perfectly. How soon can we have them installed in the fleet? Cain asked. We're already doing it. The first 500 ships have been fitted. The rest will be complete within the year. Cain allowed himself a small smile. It was a rare expression on his face these days. There was not much to smile about when you spent your days planning the destruction of those who had murdered billions of your people. But this was good news. This meant they were one step closer to the day when Earth would no longer hide in the shadows. The weapons programs were equally advanced. The kinetic accelerators were massive railguns that could fire tungsten rods at nearly the speed of light. A single shot from one of these weapons carried more energy than a nuclear bomb. They could punch through any known armor, destroy any known shield, reduce any known warship to fragments in seconds. The EMP cascades were designed to disable rather than destroy. A single missile could release a wave of electromagnetic energy that would shut down every electronic system in a fleet. Ships caught in the blast would lose power, lose navigation, lose weapons. They would drift helplessly in space, waiting to be finished off or captured. And then there were the Hellfire torpedoes. These were the most devastating weapons humanity had ever created. Each torpedo carried an antimatter warhead wrapped in a stealth field that made it nearly impossible to detect. A single Hellfire could destroy a battleship. A volley of them could tear through an entire fleet. The scientists who developed these weapons did not sleep well at night. They knew what they were building. They understood the destruction they were making possible. But they also remembered the images from the colonies. The burning cities, the mass graves, the children who had died in their beds because the galaxy had decided humanity was a threat. Those memories made the work easier. The soldiers were training in facilities scattered across the planet. General David Reyes commanded the ground forces, a man who had lost his entire family in the attack on New Shanghai and channeled his grief into a brutal efficiency that his troops both feared and respected. The training was harder than anything humanity had attempted before. Physical conditioning pushed the limits of human endurance. Combat simulations covered every possible scenario, from ship-to-ship boarding actions to planetary assault. Soldiers learned to fight in zero gravity, in hostile atmospheres, in environments that would kill an unprotected human in seconds. But the most important training was psychological. Reyes stood before a group of new recruits, young men and women who had grown up hearing stories of the betrayal. They had been children when the colonies burned. Now they were adults, ready to fight and die for a cause that had defined their entire lives. "You are not soldiers," Reyes told them. "Not yet. Soldiers fight for their country. Soldiers follow orders. Soldiers obey rules of engagement." He paced before them, his prosthetic leg clicking against the floor with each step. He had lost the original in the attack on New Shanghai, burned off by plasma fire as he carried survivors from a collapsing building. Admiral Tervax of the Velthari Dominion was enjoying a quiet evening on the orbital station above the colony world of Velkreth Minor. The station was old, built during the height of the Dominion's power, decorated with trophies from 100 conquered species. Tervax liked to walk its corridors and remember the glory days when the Velthari ruled without question. His communicator buzzed. He glanced at it, expecting routine business, and froze when he read the message. "Contact lost with Sol blockade. All stations offline. Patrol fleet not responding." Tervax read the message 3 times, certain he had misunderstood. The Sol blockade was one of the most heavily defended positions in the Concord. 200 warships, dozens of automated stations, multiple layers of sensors and weapons platforms. Nothing could destroy all of that without sending at least one distress signal. He was still trying to process the information when space split open above Velkreth Minor. The human ships emerged from their fold drives in perfect formation. 200 warships arranged in a sphere around the planet, their weapons already powered and tracking targets. They had appeared less than 10,000 kilometers from the orbital station, inside the defensive perimeter, inside the range of the planetary shields. For a moment, everything was silent. The Velthari defenders stared at their sensors in disbelief. The readings made no sense. No ship could travel that fast or appear with that kind of precision. It was impossible. Then the humans opened fire. The first volley of kinetic accelerators tore through the orbital station's shields like they were not there. Tungsten rods moving at 90% of light speed punched holes through armor plating, through bulkheads, through everything in their path. Admiral Tervax died in the first 3 seconds, reduced to vapor along with his command staff and the entire Strategic Coordination Center. The Velthari Defense Fleet scrambled to respond. 30 warships powered up their weapons and turned to engage the attackers. They were veteran crews, experienced in combat, confident in their superiority. They lasted less than 10 minutes. The human ships moved with a coordination that seemed almost choreographed. They split into squadrons, surrounded the Velthari vessels, and poured fire into them from every direction. EMP cascades disabled shields and engines. Kinetic accelerators shattered hulls. Hellfire torpedoes finished off anything that survived the initial barrage. When it was over, the wreckage of 30 Velthari warships drifted through space, mixing with the debris of the orbital station. Not a single human ship had been destroyed. 3 had minor damage. Commander Kane watched the battle from the bridge of the Vasquez's vengeance. His face showed no emotion. There was no joy in this victory, no satisfaction in the destruction. Only duty. Only the work that had to be done. "Broadcast the message," he ordered. The communications officer nodded and activated the transmission. Kane's voice carried across the system, picked up by every receiver on the planet below and the ships in orbit above. 20 years ago, you murdered our children in their beds. You burned our worlds and called it justice. Now justice comes for you. He paused, letting the words sink in. Not conquest, consequence. On the planet below, millions of Velthari civilians looked up at the sky and saw fire raining down on their orbital defenses. They did not know who was attacking or why. They only knew that death had come to their world. The human fleet did not attack the planet itself. Kane had been clear about this from the beginning. Civilians were not targets. Cities would not be bombed. The goal was not extermination. The goal was to destroy the military power that had been used against humanity and to bring the architects of the betrayal to justice. But the Velthari did not know this. They saw only warships in their sky and assumed the worst. Panic spread across Velkreth Minor. Emergency broadcasts warned of invasion. Shelters filled with frightened families. Communication systems overloaded with desperate calls. The human fleet ignored all of it. They had already identified their next targets, the military shipyards on the planet's largest moon. Within an hour, those shipyards were rubble. 300 ships under construction, gone. Manufacturing facilities that had taken decades to build, destroyed in minutes. Then the fleet vanished, folding back into faster than light. Travel as suddenly as they had appeared. The attack on Velkreth Minor was only the beginning. Across 12 star systems, human ships emerged from their full drives and began their assault. 12 systems chosen for their significance. The same number as the human colonies that had been destroyed 20 years earlier. The Krusik shipyards at Theta Epsilon fell in the first wave. The Yenari Military Academy on their third moon was reduced to smoking craters. A joint Concord naval base that served as the headquarters for the blockade fleet found itself surrounded by human warships before anyone could sound an alarm at each location. The pattern was the same. Human ships appeared without warning, inside defensive perimeters, already firing. Shields failed. Weapons platforms exploded. Command centers went dark. The attacks were surgical, precise, devastating. And everywhere, the same message played. 20 years ago, you murdered our children in their beds. You burned our worlds and called it justice. Now justice comes for you. Not conquest, consequence. The High Council received word of the attacks 3 hours after they began. By that time, 4 major military installations had been destroyed and over 100 Concord warships had been lost. Archon Sylveth stood in the council chamber, surrounded by panicked representatives from 9 species. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time in his 800 years of life, he felt something he had not experienced since he was a child. Fear. "How is this possible?" demanded the Krusik's representative. His crystal body flickered with agitation. The humans were contained. Their fleet was destroyed. They had nothing. "Obviously, we were wrong," replied the Yenari representative coldly. She had voted against the original attack on humanity and had warned for years that the blockade was not enough. No one had listened to her then. They were listening now. Sylveth stepped forward, forcing his voice to remain steady. "We must not panic. Yes, the humans have rebuilt some of their military capacity, but we still outnumber them. The combined Concord fleet is over 10,000 ships. They cannot have more than a few hundred. A few hundred? The Crew-6 representative's voice rose to a shriek. They just destroyed 4 military installations and killed thousands of our people with a few hundred ships. What happens when they bring more? They won't have the chance. We will gather the fleet and crush them before they can cause more damage. The debate continued for hours. Some representatives wanted immediate retaliation. Others argued for negotiation, for trying to find a peaceful solution. A few suggested surrendering the individuals responsible for the original betrayal in exchange for peace. Silva shot down that suggestion immediately. He knew that if the truth about his fabricated evidence came out, his own people would tear him apart. Better to fight and die than face that fate. In the end, the council authorized a full military response. Messages went out to every Concord world, calling up reserves, mobilizing fleets, preparing for war against an enemy they had thought defeated 20 years ago. They did not realize that this was exactly what Kane had expected them to do. The human attacks continued for 3 weeks. Small squadrons appeared throughout Concord space, striking targets and vanishing before response fleets could arrive. They destroyed supply depots, communications relays, sensor stations. They disrupted shipping lanes and cut off military bases from their support networks. Each attack made the Concord response more chaotic. Admirals sent fleets chasing shadows, only to find that the humans had already moved on. Intelligence services struggled to predict the next target, but the human strategy seemed random, unpredictable, impossible to counter. It was not random at all. Kane was playing a very specific game. He was forcing the Concord to spread its forces thin, to react instead of plan, to exhaust itself chasing an enemy it could not catch. While the galaxy's attention focused on the hit-and-run attacks, the main body of the human fleet was preparing for the real campaign. Captain Yara Chen led one of the strike squadrons that had been terrorizing Concord space. She was 32 years old, scarred from battles that had begun in her 20s. Driven by memories that had haunted her since childhood. She had been 4 years old when the Concorde attacked Kepler 7. Her mother had thrown her into an escape pod seconds before the house collapsed. Yara had floated in space for 6 hours before a rescue ship found her, watching through the pod's tiny window as her world burned. Now she was one of the most feared commanders in the human fleet. Her squadron had destroyed more Valkyrie ships than any other unit. Her name had become a curse word in 3 languages. Her current target was a Valkyrie supply convoy carrying weapons and ammunition to the front lines. 20 transport ships, escorted by 10 warships. A significant target, but not impossible. Chun's squadron emerged from their full drives directly in the convoy's path. The Valkyrie escorts tried to form a defensive formation, but they were too slow. Human ships cut through them like wolves through sheep. The battle lasted 12 minutes. When it was over, all 10 escort ships were debris, and the transports were surrendering. Chun boarded the largest transport personally, leading a squad of Marines through its corridors. The Valkyrie crew offered no resistance. They had heard stories about what happened to those who fought the humans. Surrender was the only logical choice. In the ship's cargo hold, Chun found enough weapons to equip an army. Missiles, railgun ammunition, plasma charges, explosives. All of it had been bound for the forces gathering to defend Valkyrie space. "Transfer everything to our ships," she ordered. "Then set the transports adrift. No need to waste ammunition on empty hulls." One of her Marines approached, a young man named Torres, who had lost his parents on New Shanghai. "Sir, we've intercepted a communication from the convoy commander." He was sending a message to Archon Sylvath himself. Chun's eyes narrowed. "What kind of message?" "A warning, sir. The Archon is gathering a fleet at Nexus Prime, over 2,000 ships. They're planning a counterattack on Earth." Chun considered this information. A strike on Earth had always been expected. The Concorde would eventually try to finish what they had started 20 years ago. But 2,000 ships was a significant force. "Transmit the intelligence to command," she ordered. "Kane needs to know about this." The message reached Kane within the hour. He read it carefully, then consulted with his admirals and generals. The news was concerning but not unexpected. The Concorde was following exactly the script he had predicted. "They think they can end this with one decisive blow," said Admiral Way, Kane's second in command. "Destroy Earth, destroy the fleet, end the human threat once and for all." "That's what they believe," Kane agreed. "And we're going to let them believe it, until we're ready to show them how wrong they are." The human fleet had been conducting its operations with only about 1/3 of its total strength. 2,000 ships remained in reserve, hidden in various locations throughout human-controlled space. Kane had been waiting for the right moment to reveal them. That moment was approaching. In Concorde space, the effects of the human attacks were beginning to show. Supply lines were disrupted. Communication networks were unreliable. Military commanders were exhausted from weeks of constant alerts and false alarms. Worse, the civilian populations were starting to ask questions. News of the attacks had spread despite government attempts at censorship. People wanted to know why the humans were attacking. They wanted to know what had started this war. The official story, that humanity had been developing a planet-killing weapon, was being questioned by journalists and historians who found the evidence unconvincing. Then the truth began to leak. The Melody representative who had given evidence to the human agents had not stopped working. He had been quietly distributing copies of his documentation to trusted colleagues, building a network of insiders who knew what had really happened. When the war began, they started releasing the information. The first leaks were small. A document here, a recording there. But they accumulated, building a picture that was impossible to ignore. The attack on humanity had been based on lies. The evidence of a planet-killing weapon had been fabricated. The betrayal had been orchestrated by Arkham Sylveth for his own political purposes. Protests erupted on a dozen worlds. Citizens demanded answers from their governments. Some species began withdrawing their representatives from the council, refusing to be associated with genocide. The Concorde was cracking. Kane watched the reports with grim satisfaction. The military campaign was only part of his strategy. The truth was equally important. He wanted the galaxy to know what had been done to humanity. He wanted every species to understand that their government had murdered billions of innocent people based on fabricated evidence. When the reckoning came, he wanted no one to be able to claim ignorance. Captain Chun's squadron was assigned to escort duty for one of the intelligence operations. A human agent who had been working on the Veltari homeworld needed extraction. The information he carried was too important to risk. The extraction went smoothly. The agent, a man named David Okafor, who had spent 5 years living among the enemy, was brought aboard Chun's flagship without incident. He looked exhausted, aged beyond his years by the stress of constant deception. "The Celestial Lance," he said as soon as he was debriefed. "They're activating it." Chun felt her blood run cold. She had heard rumors of the Celestial Lance, an ancient Veltari superweapon that had been mothballed centuries ago. A battle station the size of a small moon, capable of destroying entire planets. "Are you certain?" "I saw the orders myself. Arkham Sylveth has convinced the Council that it's the only way to end the war. They're bringing it online. Target, Earth." Chun transmitted the intelligence immediately. This changed everything. If the Celestial Lance reached Earth, no defense could stop it. The fleet could destroy thousands of enemy ships, and it would not matter. One shot from that weapon would end humanity forever. Kane received the news with the calm that had become his trademark. He had prepared for this possibility. He had hoped it would not come to this, but he had prepared. "Change of plans," he told his admirals. "We're not waiting for them to come to us. We're going to take the fight to them." The Retribution fleet began to gather. Ships that had been scattered across a dozen systems converged on a single point in deep space. 2,800 warships, the largest human fleet ever assembled, ready to face the combined might of the Galactic Concord. Kane stood on the bridge of the Vasquez's Vengeance and watched the fleet take formation around him. Each ship represented years of work, decades of sacrifice, the hopes of a species that refused to die. He thought about the journey that had brought them here. The betrayal, the silence, the building, the waiting, and now, finally, the reckoning. "Signal all ships," he ordered. "Set course for Valkyrie space. We're going to destroy the celestial lance before it can fire." The fleet acknowledged. Navigation systems plotted courses. Fold drives charged. And then, in a burst of energy that lit up sensors across half the galaxy, the human fleet vanished into faster-than-light travel. The stars had begun to scream, and they would not stop until the Concord learned the true cost of betrayal. The celestial lance hung in the void like a monument to destruction. It was old, so old that the species who had built it had gone extinct before most of the current Concord members had achieved spaceflight. The Valkyrie had found it drifting in deep space, claimed it as their own, and used it to forge their empire. For 300 years, its shadow had kept the galaxy in line. Then the Concord had formed, and the weapon had been decommissioned. Too dangerous, the Council had decided. Too powerful for any one species to control. The lance had been placed in a decaying orbit around a dead star, maintained by a skeleton crew, waiting for a day that everyone hoped would never come. That day had come. Archon Sylveth stood on the command platform of the ancient station, surrounded by his most loyal officers. The Lance's systems were humming with power for the first time in centuries. Technicians worked frantically to restore weapons that had not been fired in living memory. "How long until the primary weapon is operational?" Sylveth demanded. 6 hours, Archon. "The charging systems are functioning, but the targeting arrays need calibration." 6 hours. Sylveth nodded impatiently. The human fleet had been detected approaching Valkyrie space at impossible speeds. They would arrive within the day. He needed the lance operational before then. If he could destroy Earth, the war would end. The humans would have nothing left to fight for. Even if their fleet survived, they would be homeless, rootless, doomed to eventual extinction. All he had to do was fire one shot to finish what should have been finished 20 years ago. Around the station, the largest Valkyrie fleet ever assembled stood guard. 800 warships, plus another 500 from allied species who had remained loyal to the Council. They formed a sphere of protection around the lance, their weapons pointed outward, waiting for the enemy to arrive. They did not have to wait long. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Commander Kane had expected heavy defenses. He had planned for them. But seeing the enemy fleet arrayed before him, outnumbering his forces significantly, he felt a moment of doubt. It passed quickly. Humanity had not come this far to turn back now. "All ships, this is the commander," Kane broadcast. "The weapon before us was designed to destroy worlds. They intend to use it against Earth. We cannot allow that to happen." He paused, looking at the tactical display. Every species in this galaxy decided that human lives did not matter. Today, we show them how wrong they were. Engage the enemy. The battle began with a clash of titans. Human ships surged forward in formations, designed to maximize their firepower while minimizing their exposure. They had trained for this exact scenario, practiced it in simulations thousands of times. Every crew knew their role. Every commander understood the stakes. The Concord fleet moved to intercept. 800 warships spread out to form a defensive line, their weapons filling space with deadly fire. The first human ships entered range and shields began to flare under the bombardment. Captain Chun's squadron led the assault on the left flank. Her ships dove into the enemy formation, using their superior speed and maneuverability to avoid the heaviest fire. They targeted engines and weapon systems, crippling ships rather than destroying them, preserving ammunition for the real target. "Keep moving," Chun ordered. "Don't let them pin us down. We need to punch through to the lance." Her ships wove through the chaos, leaving disabled enemies in their wake. Around her, the battle raged with an intensity that defied description. Thousands of weapons fired every second. Shields collapsed. Hulls cracked. Ships died in bursts of fire and debris. The human fleet was taking losses. Kane watched the casualty reports scroll across his display with a heavy heart. Each destroyed ship represented hundreds of lives. Each name on the list was a person he had known, had trained, had promised to lead to victory. But the Concorde fleet was suffering worse. Human weapons were more powerful, human tactics more innovative, human crews more determined. For every human ship lost, 3 enemy vessels were destroyed or disabled. Slowly, inexorably. The human fleet pushed forward. Archon Sylveth watched the battle from the command platform of the Celestial Lance. His confidence was fading with every passing minute. The human ships fought with a ferocity he had never seen. They did not retreat when they were damaged. They did not surrender when they were surrounded. They kept fighting until their ships were nothing but wreckage. "Archon, the primary weapon is ready," reported one of his technicians. Sylveth turned to the firing controls. The targeting system showed Earth billions of kilometers away, a blue dot on the screen. One press of a button and that dot would become fire and ash. "Target confirmed," he said. "Prepare to fire." But before he could give the order, alarms began screaming throughout the station. "Intruder alert! Hull breach on Deck 7. Unknown contacts in the maintenance corridors." Sylveth's blood went cold. The humans were inside the station. Somehow, impossibly, they had gotten past the defenses. Captain Chun had volunteered for the infiltration mission personally. While the fleet engaged the enemy, a small team of stealth ships had slipped through the chaos and docked with the Lance using maintenance ports that intelligence reports had identified months earlier. Now, Chun led 20 Marines through corridors that had not seen combat in centuries. The station's internal defenses were old and poorly maintained. The crew was focused on the battle outside. No one expected an attack from within. "Keep moving," Chun ordered. "The core is 3 decks down." They encountered their first resistance at a junction point. A squad of Veltari soldiers, hastily assembled, opened fire as soon as the humans appeared. The firefight was brief and brutal. 4 humans fell. All of the Veltari died. Chun stepped over the bodies without pause. They were running out of time. If Sylveth managed to fire the Lance before they reached the core, Earth would be destroyed, and everything they had fought for would be lost. The team pushed deeper into the station. More Veltari tried to stop them. More Veltari died. Chun took a plasma burn to her left arm that scorched through her armor and blistered the skin beneath. She ignored the pain and kept moving. Finally, they reached the core. The room was enormous, filled with ancient machinery that pulsed with barely contained energy. The weapons charging systems lined the walls, glowing with a blue-white light that hurt to look at. At the center, a control console displayed the targeting coordinates. Sylveth was there. The Archon stood before the console, his hand hovering over the firing control. Around him stood his personal guard, the elite soldiers who had protected him for centuries. They raised their weapons as the humans entered. "Stop right there," Sylveth commanded. His voice was calm despite the chaos. One more step and I fire. Your planet dies. Chun halted. Her Marines spread out behind her, weapons ready, waiting for her order. You can't stop what's coming, Sylveth continued. Even if you kill me, even if you destroy this station, humanity is finished. The galaxy will never accept you. You will always be the enemy. Chun looked at the ancient creature who had orchestrated the murder of billions. He was taller than her, older than her civilization, confident in his superiority. He believed every word he was saying. She smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. You're right, she said. The galaxy will never accept us. We don't need them to. She raised her voice, knowing that the station's internal communications would carry her words. But they will know the truth about what you did. A holographic display flickered to life above the control console. The evidence that the Melody representative had gathered, the proof of Sylveth's fabricated conspiracy, began playing for everyone on the station to see. Communications intercepts. Falsified reports. Orders to manufacture evidence. Recordings of Sylveth himself, boasting to his allies about how easily he had manipulated the Council into authorizing genocide. The Velthury guards watched with growing horror. They had been told they were defending their civilization against a genuine threat. They had believed that humanity had been planning to destroy them. Now they were learning that it had all been lies. This is what your Archon built, Chun said. This is what your Honorable Council approved. Remember this. One of the guards lowered his weapon. Then another. Then 3 more. Their loyalty had limits, and those limits had just been reached. Sylveth saw his support crumbling. He lunged for the firing control, determined to complete his mission, even if it cost him everything. Chun was faster. She crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and tackled him away from the console. They crashed to the floor, struggling. Sylveth was stronger, but Chun had trained for this her entire life. She pinned his arm behind his back and pressed her weapon to his head. My daughter was on Kepler 7, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was 4 years old. Her name was Sarah. She liked to draw pictures of the stars. Sylveth went still. For the first time, something like fear flickered in his ancient eyes. Chun wanted to pull the trigger. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to end this creature who had caused so much suffering. But Cain had been clear. Sylveth was to be taken alive. He would face justice. Real justice, not execution in a hallway. She lowered her weapon and signaled her Marines to secure the prisoner. Torres, disable the weapon. Everyone else, secure the room. We're holding this position until the fleet arrives. Outside, the battle was reaching its climax. Cain had received Chun's transmission and knew that the lance was no longer a threat. He pressed his attack with renewed determination. The Concorde fleet was breaking. Ships that had been holding the line began to retreat. Allied species who had joined the Velthury out of fear decided that survival was more important than loyalty. One by one, squadrons peeled away from the battle and fled into faster-than-light travel. Within an hour, only a handful of Velthury ships remained. They fought to the end, but the end came quickly. The Celestial Lance's self-destruct had been disabled by Chun's team. Human engineers swarmed the station, studying its systems, learning its secrets. They would not use it against civilian populations. That was not the human way. But they would make sure no one else could use it either. The station was destroyed 3 days later, reduced to atoms by human demolition charges. Its wreckage scattered through the void, a monument to the end of an era. Archon Sylveth was transported to the Vasquez's vengeance in chains. He did not speak during the journey. He did not respond when Cain came to his cell. He simply stared at the wall, his ancient mind struggling to accept that his plans had failed. Cain did not waste time on speeches. There would be time for that later, when Sylveth stood trial before the galaxy. For now, there was still work to be done. The Concord was collapsing. News of the Lance's destruction spread throughout the galaxy within hours. The evidence of Sylveth's conspiracy followed. Governments that had supported the original attack on humanity found themselves facing furious populations demanding answers. The Melody were the first to formally withdraw from the Council. Their representative issued a public statement condemning the betrayal and calling for peace with humanity. The Crucix followed within days. Then the Yenari. 3 species out of 9 was not a majority, but it was a start. More importantly, it was a crack in the foundation of the Concord. A crack that Kane intended to widen. He offered the defecting species terms: reparations for the damage caused during the war, extradition of war criminals, and formal recognition of their innocence in the original conspiracy. In exchange, humanity would not attack their worlds or their ships. The terms were harsh, but they were fair. The defecting species accepted. Those who remained loyal to the Council found themselves increasingly isolated. Their fleets were depleted. Their economies were strained. Their populations were restless. Every day brought new protests, new demands, new cracks in the system that had governed the galaxy for millions of years. Kane gave them one final chance. His message was broadcast to every world in the Concord, played on every newsfeed, heard by billions of beings across 1,000 star systems. The war is over for those who choose peace. The species who have withdrawn from the Council will not be harmed. Their worlds will not be attacked. They have acknowledged the truth and accepted responsibility. But the Council itself still stands. The government that authorized genocide still rules. The individuals who voted for the murder of billions still hold power. This is not acceptable. We are coming to Nexus Prime. We are coming for the Council. Those who wish to live should surrender now. Those who wish to fight will find us ready. The message ended. Across the galaxy, governments began to collapse. Species that had been wavering made their decisions. By the time the human fleet was ready to move, only 6 species remained aligned with the Council. 6 species, and perhaps 3,000 ships, gathered at Nexus Prime for what everyone knew would be the final battle. Kane stood on the bridge of the Vasquez's Vengeance and studied the tactical display. 2,300 human warships remained operational. They were outnumbered, but not by much. And they had advantages the enemy could not match. The path to Nexus Prime is clear, Admiral Way reported. All resistance between here and the capital has been neutralized or has surrendered. Kane nodded slowly. He thought about the journey that had brought them here. 20 years of silence. 20 years of building. 20 years of waiting for this moment. Then we end this where it began, he said. The fleet began to move. 2,300 warships, carrying the hopes and dreams and fury of a species that had refused to die. They were tired. They had lost friends and family in the fighting. They had seen horrors that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. But they had not given up. They had not surrendered. They had done what humans always did when faced with impossible odds. They had found a way to win. The full drives activated. The fleet vanished into faster-than-light travel. Nexus Prime awaited, and with it, the final reckoning. Nexus Prime was beautiful. The capital world of the galactic Concord hung in space like a jewel against black velvet. Its surface was a patchwork of glittering cities and azure oceans, connected by transportation networks that spanned continents. Orbital stations circled the planet in layers, thousands of them, housing diplomats and traders and citizens from every corner of the galaxy. For millions of years, this had been the center of galactic civilization. Decisions made here had shaped the fates of entire species. Wars had been ended here. Treaties had been signed here. The future of the galaxy had been written and rewritten in the halls of the council spire that rose from the planet's surface like a needle, piercing the sky. Now it was about to become a battlefield. Commander Kane stood on the bridge of the Vasquez's vengeance. As the human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, around him, 2,300 warships took formation, their weapons powered, their crews ready for the final battle. The enemy was waiting for them. The Concord's last fleet had gathered around Nexus Prime, 3,000 warships from 6 species, arranged in defensive formations around the planet. They had positioned themselves to protect the orbital stations and the cities below, betting that humanity would not fire on civilian targets. They were right, but that did not mean they were safe. Kane opened the channel to all ships, friendly and enemy alike. His voice carried across the system, heard by millions of beings who had gathered to witness the end of an era. I am Commander Marcus Kane of the Human Retribution Fleet. 20 years ago, your council voted to destroy my people based on lies fabricated by Archon Sylveth of the Velthari Dominion. You murdered 2.3 billion innocent men, women, and children. You burned our colonies. You executed our ambassador. You thought you had ended us. You were wrong. We have not come for conquest. We have not come for revenge. We have come for justice. Surrender the architects of the betrayal. Surrender those who voted for genocide. Face trial for your crimes. Do this and the war ends. Your worlds will not be harmed. Your people will not be punished for the actions of your leaders. Refuse, and you will face the consequences of your choices. Humanity did not start this war, but we will finish it. The message ended. Silence followed. On the council spire, the remaining representatives of the Concord gathered for what they knew might be their final meeting. 6 species, 6 terrified governments. 6 groups of politicians who had wagered everything on defeating the humans and lost. The most senior among them was Lord Cathaner of the Osiran Dominion, a species of beings who resembled walking trees, their bark-like skin creased with age and worry. He had voted for the original attack on humanity, not because he believed in Sylveth's lies, but because he had feared the political consequences of opposing the VELTRI. Now he faced the consequences of that cowardice. We should surrender, he said. The war is lost. Our fleets are depleted. Our allies have abandoned us. The humans are offering terms. The humans are offering humiliation, snarled Admiral Vortek, the Velthari military commander who had taken charge after Sylveth's capture. They want to parade us before the galaxy like criminals. They want to destroy everything the Concord has built. The Concord is already destroyed. We destroyed it ourselves 20 years ago, when we agreed to murder a species that had done nothing wrong. The debate continued, but it was clear that no consensus would be reached. The council had been paralyzed by fear and disagreement for weeks. They had lost the ability to make decisions. They could only react to events that had spiraled beyond their control. In the end, Admiral Vortek made the choice for them. The fleet will engage, he announced. We still have numerical superiority. We can still win this. He did not believe it. No one in the room believed it. But it was easier to fight than to admit defeat. It was easier to die in battle than to face the judgment of those they had wronged. The Concord fleet moved to intercept the humans. Kane watched the enemy approach with a mixture of sadness and determination. He had hoped they would choose peace. He had known they probably would not. Fear and pride were powerful things, and the Concord had too much of both. All ships, engage, he ordered. Protect the civilian stations. Target military vessels only. Let's finish this. The final battle of the war began with a thunder of weapons fire that lit up the darkness of space. Human. Ships dove into the enemy formation with the precision and aggression that had become their trademark. Kinetic accelerators punched through shields and armor. EMP cascades disabled engines and weapon systems. Hellfire torpedoes found their targets with deadly accuracy. The Concorde fleet fought back with desperate courage. They knew they were outmatched, but they refused to surrender. Ships that lost their weapons tried to ram the humans. Crews that should have evacuated stayed at their posts and died with their vessels. Captain Chen led her squadron in a flanking maneuver that cut off a group of Valkyrie battleships from the main fleet. She had been fighting for weeks, barely sleeping, running on adrenaline and determination. Her ship bore the scars of a dozen engagements, its hull patched and repatched by engineers working around the clock. "Focus fire on the lead ship," she ordered. "Disable their engines. I want them adrift." The squadron complied, their weapons concentrating on a single target until its engines went dark and it began to drift. Then they moved to the next ship and the next and the next. Around the battlefield, the same pattern repeated. Human ships worked in coordinated teams, overwhelming enemy vessels one at a time, reducing the Concorde fleet piece by piece. But it was not without cost. The Vasquez's Vengeance took a direct hit to its port side that killed 30 crew members and crippled one of its weapon batteries. Kane barely noticed the impact. He was focused on the tactical display, watching the flow of battle, making decisions that would determine the fate of thousands. "Sir, we've lost the destroyer Chen Wei," reported his aide. 300 casualties. Kane nodded. He did not have time to mourn. There would be time for that later, assuming they survived. After 4 hours of fighting, the Concorde fleet was broken. Over 2,000 ships had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors were scattered, running for their lives, no longer fighting as a coherent force. Admiral Vortek's flagship was among the last to fall. He had stayed in the fight until the end, directing his forces even as his ship was torn apart around him. When his bridge finally collapsed, he was at his post, giving orders to ships that no longer existed. The orbital stations around Nexus Prime had been spared. Human ships had positioned themselves to draw fire away from civilian targets, taking hits they could have avoided in order to protect innocents who had no part in this war. Kane looked at the cost of that decision on his casualty reports and felt the weight of every name. The path to the council. Spire was clear. Ground. Forces began their descent through the atmosphere. Shuttles and dropships carried thousands of Marines toward the capital city. Their mission clear: secure the council chamber and capture any surviving officials who had voted for the betrayal. Captain Chen led the assault personally. She had been offered a rest rotation, had been told she had done enough, but she had refused. She needed to see this through. She needed to be there when the council faced the consequences of its actions. Her shuttle touched down in a plaza a quarter-mile from the spire. Around her, buildings that had stood for millions of years were intact, untouched by the fighting. The humans had been careful. They had targeted only military assets. The city itself was unharmed. "Move out," Chen ordered. "Keep formation. Watch for resistance." The Marines advanced through streets that were empty of civilians, but full of the debris of collapsed authority. Security checkpoints had been abandoned. Government vehicles sat where their drivers had left them. The mechanisms of power had simply stopped working. They reached the spire without firing a shot. The building's defenders had surrendered the moment the first human boots touched the ground. They had seen what had happened to the fleet. They had no desire to share that fate. Inside, the spire was a maze of corridors and chambers that had accumulated over millions of years. Chum's team navigated using maps that intelligence had provided, moving toward the council chamber at the heart of the structure. They found the surviving council members waiting for them. 6 beings sat at a table designed for 12. their faces showing varying degrees of fear and resignation. Lord Kethaner was among them, his bark-like skin pale and cracked. The others were representatives from 5 different species, each one responsible for the deaths of billions. They did not resist when Chun's Marines entered. They did not speak when she approached the table. They simply sat and waited for whatever came next. Chun looked at them for a long moment. These were the beings who had voted to destroy her people. These were the creatures who had decided that human lives had no value. These were the monsters who had orphaned her at 4 years old. She wanted to hate them. She wanted to feel the burning rage that had driven her for 20 years. But looking at them now, she felt only emptiness. They were pathetic. They were broken. They were not worth her hatred. "You are under arrest for crimes against humanity," she said. Her voice was calm, professional, devoid of emotion. "You will be transported to human custody for trial. Any resistance will be met with force." None of them resisted. Kane arrived at the spire 3 hours later, after the planet had been secured and the remaining enemy forces had surrendered. He walked through the corridors that had once been the center of galactic power, past murals depicting the history of the Concord, past statues of beings who had shaped the destiny of civilizations. He felt nothing. This place meant nothing to him. It was just a building. The real victory had already been won. Arkan Sylveth was brought to the council chamber in chains. He had been silent since his capture, refusing to speak, refusing to acknowledge the reality of his defeat. But when he was led into the chamber where he had once held absolute power, something broke inside him. "This is not justice," he said, his voice cracking. "This is revenge. You're no better than us." Kane turned to face him. For a long moment, he simply looked at the creature who had caused so much suffering. Then he spoke. "You're right. This is not justice. Justice would be impossible. There is no punishment proportionate to what you did. No court could restore the lives you took. No sentence could ease the suffering you caused." He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Sylveth's face. "But this is consequence. You chose to destroy us. You chose to murder our children. You chose to watch our ambassador die and call it righteousness. Now you will face the results of those choices. Not because it will bring back the dead. Not because it will make things right. But because actions have consequences, and you are not exempt." Sylveth had no response. For the first time in his 800 years of life, he had nothing to say. The trial was broadcast across the galaxy. Every species, every world, every being with access to a communication device watched as the evidence was presented. They saw the fabricated reports. They heard the intercepted communications. They watched recordings of Sylveth himself, boasting about how easily he had manipulated the council into authorizing genocide. The truth could no longer be hidden. The truth could no longer be denied. Sylveth and the council members who had voted for the betrayal were found guilty of crimes against sentient life. They were sentenced to imprisonment for the remainder of their natural lives, their names to be recorded in the archives of every species as a warning to future generations. Some had wanted execution. Some had demanded that the punishment match the crime. But Kane had refused. Humanity would not become what it had been accused of being. Humanity would prove that it was better than those who had tried to destroy it. 1 year later, a memorial was built on Earth. It stood in the place where the Parliament building had once been. A towering structure of white stone inscribed with the names of every human who had died in the betrayal. 2.3 billion names, carved into walls that stretched for miles, each one a reminder of what had been lost and what had been fought for. Kane stood before the memorial, his hand resting on the stone. He was 81 years old now, his body finally giving out after decades of pushing beyond its limits. Doctors had told him he had months to live. He had accepted the news with the same calm he had accepted everything else. A child tugged at his sleeve. She was 6 years old, the daughter of one of his aides, too young to understand the significance of where she stood, but old enough to sense that it was important. "Did we win, Grandpa?" she asked. Kane looked at her. He thought about his daughter, who had died on Kepler-7 when she was not much older than this child. He thought about the 2 billion other lives that had been cut short. He thought about the war and the suffering and the long years of silence that had preceded the reckoning. Had they won? The Concorde was gone, replaced by a new alliance that included humanity as an equal partner. The species that had attacked them had paid for their crimes. The truth had been told, and the galaxy had been forced to confront its own capacity for evil. But the dead were still dead. The suffering could not be undone. The scars would never fully heal. Kane looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the beings who had tried to destroy humanity were living in prison cells, facing the consequences of their choices. Somewhere out there, a new generation was being born, humans and aliens alike, who would grow up in a galaxy that had learned, perhaps, to be a little more careful about the decisions it made. "We survived," he said finally. "That's what humans do." The child nodded, satisfied with the answer, and ran off to explore the memorial. Kane watched her go, a small smile on his weathered face. The galaxy stretched out above him, vast and ancient and full of wonders that humanity had only begun to explore. There would be new challenges ahead, new dangers, new opportunities. The universe did not care about justice or vengeance or the struggles of moral beings. It simply was, and it would continue to be long after everyone currently alive had returned to dust. But humanity would face whatever came. They had proven that much. They had faced extinction and refused to accept it. They had been betrayed by those they trusted and found the strength to survive. They had learned hard lessons about the nature of power and the price of weakness. And they had remembered. The stars continued to shine, indifferent and eternal. But somewhere among them, a new light had been kindled. A light that would not be easily extinguished. A light that would guide humanity through whatever darkness lay ahead. The memorial stood silent, its walls covered with names that would never be forgotten. The wind blew across its surface, carrying whispers of the past and promises of the future. Humanity had come home, and humanity would never again be prey.